Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Spooky Sundays. You know, I was talking to Wayne about how much I was going to miss doing these and how much I enjoyed doing these. And I said, I'm really going to hate that I have to stop. And he said, well, then don't. So I am happy to let you know that it may not be every Spooky Sunday, but we will be sharing spooky tales from here on out. So stay tuned for those. Tonight is a twofer. I was able to find two pretty spooky tales that I hope that you will enjoy as much as I did. They're entitled When the Basement's Silence Broke, How a Whispered Call Left Me Froze. And the second story is entitled The Night I Met the Ghostly Eyes, A Haunting Memory by the Railroad Tracks. And if I'm not mistaken, they are both by Reddit user good_Barracuda2409. So thank you for your submission to Reddit with those. Let's get started. I never believed in ghosts. Not really. I mean, I like to read about them, hear stories from friends, maybe even watch some ghost shows on TV late at night. But deep down, I always thought it was just stuff people made up to scare themselves. Well, that all changed when I moved into that old house on Oak Street. I was just out of college, broke and desperate for a cheap place to stay. That's how I ended up renting the basement apartment in this rundown house that looked like it had seen better days. Maybe back in the 1920s or something. It had that classic creepy look, paint peeling off the walls, and windows that looked like they'd been fogged over for 100 years. But hey, it was cheap, and I figured I'd make do until I found something better. The first few days were fine. I moved in my stuff, which wasn't much. Just a mattress, a few boxes of clothes, my laptop, and a mini fridge. The basement had this weird smell, like old wood and dampness, but I got used to it. What I didn't get used to, though, was the sound. It started on my second night there. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, when I heard it. A whisper. At first, I thought it was my imagination, or the pipes creaking in the walls. But then, I heard it again. It was a soft, almost breathless whisper, like someone was trying to say something but couldn't quite make the words out. I sat up and I listened closely. The whisper was coming from the corner of the room, the darkest part where the light from my lamp didn't quite reach. I stared into that corner, waiting for my eyes to adjust to the darkness. Nothing was there, just a shadow. But I swear I could still hear it, like someone was standing there, just out of sight, murmuring just below the level that I could understand. Must be the pipes, I said out loud, mostly to convince myself. But as I tried to sleep, the whispering didn't stop. It was constant, like a low hum just at the edge of hearing. I eventually fell asleep out of sheer exhaustion. The next day, I asked the landlord, an old guy named Mr. Peterson, if there was some sort of draft or issue with the plumbing down there. He looked at me with this odd expression, almost like he knew something but didn't want to say. Nah, the pipes are fine, he said. Just an old house. Gets noisy sometimes. I didn't press him much, but his eyes told me something else. Like he was hiding his story that he just didn't want to share. Anyway, I let it go, told myself I was just being paranoid, and tried to shake off the feeling that something was watching me. However, that night, the whispering started again. Only this time it was louder and clearer, and I could almost make out words. It then sounded like my name. Jack. It was drawn out, slow, like a breeze passing through leaves, but with just enough shape to it that it sent chills down my spine. I sat up and turned on the light, staring at that corner once again. My heart was pounding and I could barely breathe. I didn't want to admit that I was scared, but man, I was terrified. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the whispering stopped. I sat there in silence, my ears straining to catch any sound, any hint that I wasn't losing my mind. Then I heard something else, a shuffling sound, like feet dragging across the floor. It wasn't in the corner anymore. It was behind me. I spun around so fast, I nearly fell off my bed. But there was nothing there, just the bare wall and the old wooden floor. I knew then that this wasn't just my imagination. Something was in that basement with me, and it was not friendly. The next day, I called a friend of mine, Dave, who was into all this paranormal stuff. He loved anything creepy and anything ghostly, and I figured if anyone would know what was going on, it would be him. When he showed up, he bought this weird box with him. An EMF meter, he called it. We started moving around the basement, Dave holding the meter out in front of him like he was some kind of ghost hunter. The needle on the meter barely moved, and he was starting to look disappointed when we got to that corner, the corner where I'd heard the whispers. The needle shot up, spiking into red. Dude, there is something here, he said, his voice trembling with excitement. Like, seriously, something is messing with the electromagnetic field. Great. Just what I needed, proof that I wasn't just imagining it. The weird part was that as soon as Dave said that, the air in the room seemed to change. It got colder, like someone had cranked up the AC. I could see my breath fogging in front of me. And then, out of nowhere, we both heard the whispering. But this time, it was louder than ever. Stay out of here. It was as clear as day, like a command from someone who was standing right next to us. Dave looked at me, eyes wide with terror, and I knew that he had heard it too. We both bolted out of that basement, stumbling over each other to get to the stairs. Once we were outside, Dave turned to me, pale as a sheet. "You have to move, man. Whatever that is, it's not happy that you're here." But I couldn't just pack up and leave. I didn't have the money to move, and honestly, I was too stubborn to let some ghost kick me out of my cheap place. So I decided to stay. But I made one change. I avoided the basement as much as possible. I moved my stuff upstairs, sleeping on the couch in the living room. Anything to put some distance between me and whatever was down there. A week went by without any incidents, and I was starting to think maybe it was all just in my head, that I had let Dave's ghost hunting talk get. But then, one night, just as I was about to fall asleep on the couch, I heard it again. Not a whisper this time, but a voice, loud and clear. "I warned you." It came from the basement, echoing up the stairs. I froze, my heart pounding like a drum, and then the sound of heavy footsteps started coming up the stairs. One slow step at a time. Each step creaked louder than the last, and I could feel the vibration of each one through the floor. I didn't wait to see what was coming. I grabbed my keys, ran out of that house, and I did not look back. I ended up sleeping in my car that night, parked a few blocks away. The next day, I went back to grab my stuff, dragging Dave with me as backup. We packed everything up in record time, both of us too scared to stick around. As we were leaving, Mr. Peterson came out of the house, watching us with a sad look on his face. "I told you it was just an old house," he said, almost like he was apologizing. But there was something in his eyes, a kind of knowing that made me wonder how many other people had heard the whispers in that basement. I never went back. I moved into a crummy studio apartment on the other side of town, no basement, and no creepy corners. Sometimes I still think about that house on Oak Street, and I wonder what's down there, waiting for the next person to move in. And the scariest part, I never found out what it wanted, what I was supposed to have done wrong, or why it chose me. All I know is whatever it was angry, and it had made one thing very clear. I wasn't welcome there. The night I met the ghostly eyes, a haunting memory by the railway tracks. Sometimes you find yourself in a dark place, inside you. This happened many decades ago when I was still a young schoolboy. Imagine those days. No smartphones, no video games, no internet, not even CDs and DVDs. It was a time when entertainment meant going to the cinema, especially if you were a young boy living in a small town in India. And I certainly lived in a small, dusty town near the east coast of southern India. We lived in a small, rented house close to the railway line. The notable thing about this railway line was that it almost bisected the town. It was a major line connecting Madras in the south to Calcutta in the north, east. They weren't called Chennai and Calcutta back then. Most of the old town lived west of the railway line, while some of the new developments grew on the eastern side. As children, we really looked forward to the movies because these were rare events. The movie I wanted to watch was an old black and white film. It was a hugely popular film back in the day, and it was being re-released, and so I was full of excitement. Soon, the movie released at a theater called Vahaya Mahal. And Vahaya Mahal was on the other side, on the eastern side of the railway line, while we lived on the western side. For some reason, I don't remember now, I decided to catch the late night show, typically starting around 10 p.m. and lasting to almost 1 a.m. in the morning. Despite some grumbling, I received permission from the family. The day finally arrived, and after an early dinner, I bounded off with excitement. I sat spellbound, thoroughly enjoying the fights, the songs, and all the usual stuff. The movie finally got over around 1 a.m. The few people who came to watch the late night show took different routes to wherever they had to go. As for me, I was thrilled. I was over the moon. As I walked back, I kept reliving the scenes in my fantasy-filled teen head. Further along the railway line, there was a manned railway gate about a kilometer from the theater, where all the traffic was supposed to cross over to the other side. But it was 1 a.m. and the town was fast asleep. All was quiet, except for the sound of crickets from the wayside bushes. Instead of crossing the railway tracks at the manned gate, I decided to just walk across and make a shortcut out of it. In a while, I crossed the thorny thuma bushes that acted as feeble barriers around the railway line. As I approached, even the crickets fell silent. I started climbing the steep embankment made of crushed gravel that cushioned the tracks. Way over to my right, in the far distance, I could see the dim lights set around the railway gate, distant and hardly visible. Back where I was, I crunched over the gravel and got to the top of the embankment. It was quite dark, but I wasn't scared. In fact, I was not even conscious of my surroundings. I was a boy lost in his celluloid reveries. Now I crossed the first railway track and started descending. A few feet away was the second rise with the second track. I slowly stepped into the hollow between the two embankments. I was right in the middle. Then something soft touched my feet. I looked down, but I couldn't see anything, not even my feet. The darkness seemed denser in the hollow. There was no moon in the sky and hardly any starlight. What was it? Still, in my distracted mind, I acted without thinking. What was it touching my feet? I bent close to the ground, and my hand stretched to touch whatever it was that was touching me. A few moments passed, and slowly I came out of my reverie. Now I was back in this world, conscious of the darkness, conscious of the sound of crickets that took up the chorus again, conscious of my exposed feet and simple bata chapelles, conscious that my face was mere inches from the ground, almost smelling it, conscious of something soft against my feet and my fingers touching the softness. The dim world came into focus, and I saw two eyes staring up into mine. Their whites were barely visible in the dimness. They looked at me as I looked at them, inches apart. And I saw what my fingers were grabbing. It was hair. Soft, loose, long, lifeless, wet hair. I was looking at a human head. A female human head. I was standing where her body should have been. Something clenched inside very, very slowly. I let go of the hair and stood up. I backed up a couple of steps, cautiously, deliberately, and silently. I started moving away from her. With all my senses now focused, I climbed the other embankment, making sure I didn't slip on the loose gravel. One step at a time, one breath at a time. As I crossed the second track, I noticed dimly again what might have been a body without a head. I wasn't sure. I didn't want to be sure. I descended the second berm without turning my head. My back was tingling as though it was being watched by a pair of dead eyes. What if a dead mouth suddenly whispered my name? What if a headless body suddenly rolled over and tried to grab my ankles? Stop it. Stop thinking. One step, one breath. Soon I was walking among the brambles again. This time I wasn't careful. I didn't notice the thorns that were scratching at me. I didn't feel the web of bleeding lines they made on my exposed calves and knees. I needed to keep walking, and that's what I did. Finally, I was on the other side on the road that ran along the track and then away from it. Standing under a lamppost and the dull pool of flickering light it made, I looked down at my feet. Nothing was touching them. I didn't want to look at my slightly gummy right hand. I only wanted to leave it behind so it didn't come with me. And then I started running, as silently as I could so as not to wake the dead. Postscript. A day later, Semaine Rafud, the popular local newspaper with a small circulation, carried a piece of news about the woman who had committed suicide by jumping in front of that train. No one knew what desperation or what hopelessness made her do it. Memory is a strange thing. Sometimes you remember the silliest of things all your life and forget the most important ones. And some incidents burn deep, as though branded with a hot iron. This was one such memory. I dared not to speak about it to anyone for a very long time. Certainly not my family. I slept fitfully that night, but I didn't come down with fever or go into a shock. I was normal outside, but it took a long time before darkness was just darkness again, and not something with damp hair and empty, staring eyes. I hope that you enjoyed these two very scary tales of terror. And I do hope that you will come back for your next adventure with me as we embark on another spooky tale on another spooky Sunday. And until we meet again,